Hi, in this video I'm going to show you how I made this succulents garden using Speedtree and Blender. For this tutorial I will create these two types of plants. So let's start. First of all, I went into Blender and created the scene. I used the metric system as you see here. The two main meshes of this scene are the walls and the ground. Both of them are UV unwrapped and have Megascans materials assigned. Now I'm going to export these two meshes, but before that make sure each one has scale and rotation applied. You can do so by pressing Shift-A and then clicking on Rotation and Scale. You also need to verify if the normals have the correct orientation. To see this, go to the Viewport Overlays and enable Face Orientation. If a face is blue, then the normals are OK. If a face is red, then select it, press Alt-N and then click on Flip. OK, then I selected each mesh and exported them as OBJ. In the export settings I marked selection only and in the up option chose Z up. So now let's go to Speedtree. Now, here you can see I already have my materials loaded, and I also loaded the meshes I previously exported from Blender. For the ground material, you need to go to Cutout Meshes and assign the ground mesh. And you also need to do the same for the walls material. For this scene, I also set the units to meters to match better with the scale of the meshes I imported. Now I right-clicked on the tree node and added a mesh node. Then in the Mesh tab I selected the material of the wall. I also marked Use Actual Size so it has the same scale as in Blender. Then I duplicated this mesh and chose the ground material. And now we are ready to start. First, I added a zone node. With this node you can create foliage or add objects onto the disk you see here. It works just like the tree generator, but you can move it or rotate it. I pressed W to enable the node mode and then moved it to the place you see here. You can make it more precise by going to the left panel. Then I went back to the generator mode and in the Gen tab reduced the size of this zone. Now I have added a trunk tube node. In the spine tab I decreased its length to 1.7 and in the skin tab I set its radius to 0.4. After that, I added a tubes branch. I changed its absolute length to 2 and its radius to 0.3 of the parent. I also changed the blue curve to max so it had a constant radius. This is just to see the overall shape of the plant better. In the generation mode I used absolute steps. As you can see, the steps are created by default from the base to the top of the trunk. And in the number per step I chose a number of 10. Then, I went to the spine tab and changed the start angle to 0.45. I used the green curve on the right to make the top tubes with a lower start angle as you see here. Next, I changed the value of the gravity to a -1 so these tubes bent upwards. After that I went to the green curve of the length and changed the length of the tubes to give it the overall shape of the plant. Then I went to the skin tab and changed the type to spine only, so now these tubes are just going to be used as a guide for the fronds. And then added a frond node. After that I dragged the leaf material onto this node. If you go to the scribe mode you can see there are too many vertical subdivisions, so I decreased this number by going to the segments tab. On the other hand, if you want to decrease the number of horizontal subdivisions, you must do it on the Segments tab of the Tubes node. Now I'm increasing the roll parameter of the Tubes node so each step changes its alignment, and so we almost have the overall look of the plant. Here you can see there are too many leaves in the center. To decrease this number, I went to the blue curve of the number per step parameter and moved the right point down. After that, I decreased the first value to 0 so the leaves start from the bottom of the trunk, and then increased the last value to about 1.3. With the sync parameter, you can move each tube out of the trunk. I used a low negative value so they don't overlap too much in the center. Next, I selected the frond node, and in the Geometry tab went to the blue curve of the width parameter to increase the width of the tip of the leaves. By double-clicking on a point, you can make smoother transitions. Here you can see that the leaves are slightly bent, so I went to the Geometry tab and increased the curl property a bit. Then what I did was to change the intensity of the gravity of the steps. To cover the bottom part of the plant, you can just move the zone down a bit. Now, here you can see that the overlap is too visible. To fix this, select the Tubes node and in the Gen tab increase the spread property a bit. Next, I selected all these nodes and duplicated them. This will create another plant similar to this one. I pressed W and then moved it to this place. Then I changed the scale, number of leaves, and properties like the roll and gravity. After that, I repeated the same process a few times as you see here. Now I'm going to create the other plant. In this case, I want to make them grow at some specific places. There are multiple ways you can do this, but in this case I will use masks. So the first thing I'm going to do is select the meshes and export them as FBX. I used a scale of 100 to match the scale I have in Blender, and then click OK. Now I'm back in Blender. To import the meshes previously exported, I'm going to use the Speedtree add-on, which you can find inside the Speedtree installation folder. But you can also download it from its page. When you export your mesh from Speedtree, an STMAT file is also created, and this add-on allows you to import this file format. As you can see, it automatically creates the material for each of the meshes, so it's really useful. Now I will create the mask. In this case, I duplicated the original ground and worked on this copy. To make the mask, you need to have your UV inside this unit space. After that, I went to the material of this mesh and created a 2K black image texture. Then I went to the texture paint mode and painted with white the places I want to grow the plants. After you finish the paint, go to Image and save this texture as PNG. And then export this new mesh with the following settings. Now I'm back in Speedtree. Here I've imported the mesh I previously exported. And in the Masks tab I've imported the mask. Now what I'm going to do is to hide the ground and create a zone node. In the Skin tab I enabled meshes and here I chose the ground mask. If it's not visible, just click Use Actual Size 2 times. To align this mesh to the right place, go to the Gen tab and in Last change the value to 0. This will put the mesh at the origin of the scene. And then in the Placement tab rotate it to the right place. After that I added a trunk tube node onto this zone node. This will create a trunk on the faces of the mesh. And then I edited his length and radius. In the generation mode I used absolute, and as you can see the number below specifies how many trunks are being created. Right now they are at random places. So now I'm going to use the mask I created. First, I selected the zone node and in the Gen tab clicked on the plus button to add a mask. Here I chose the mask image I imported previously. Then I went to the trunk tube node and did the same thing. Now they are growing in the white places I painted before. At this time we can just hide the zone and unhide the ground mesh, so we have a better idea of the final result. To have a better scatter of the trunks, go to the Skin tab of the zone node and here enable Area Influence to make a more even distribution over the mesh. And also adapt to masks to best fill in the masked area. Now I'm going to continue creating the plant. I increased the number and also dragged the material I made for this plant. I changed their length to a value of 0.12 and added some randomness. Then I changed their radius to 0.01 and set the blue curve to max. Right now there are too many horizontal subdivisions, so I went to the Segments tab and decreased its value. These are small plants so I don't need too much geometry. Then, I added a branch tubes node on top of this node. For the generation mode I used absolute steps with 4 steps and 5 tubes per step. After that, I increased the rotation parameter and gave different values using the green curve on the right. Then I changed their length and made the top tubes shorter. For their start angle I made the top ones to have a lower value as you see here. After that, I added a negative gravity effect and with the blue curve I varied this effect along each tube. For the radius I tried to make the end part of each tube a little bit round. To make it more round we need more geometry, so what I did was to go to the Segments tab and edit this yellow curve. This is a distribution curve, where the left point represents the bottom of each tube and the right one the top of each tube. If you push up the right-hand side of this curve, then more geometry is going to be pushed to the top of the tubes. By doing this we can have more geometry at the top of the tubes while trying to maintain the same number of divisions. Now I'm going to assign the material. I made 2 variations, so to add a second one click on the plus button and select the second material. By default each material is randomly assigned. As you can see here the texture is not seamless, so there would be visible seams. To match the texture size to the length of the tubes like in this image, go to the UV tab and in Style change it to U and V locked. Here I forgot, but you also need to change this parameter to absolute. And now the scene is finished. You can then make a render using Speedtree, or you can export it to another 3D software as you see here. And that's it. If there is any suggestion, you can leave it in the comments. Thank you for watching.